Okay, good evening, everyone. Time now is 7 p.m. Let me just. Tonight's January 11th ZBA meeting has been moved to a remote meeting on Zoom. This notice is hereby given to that the meeting will be held by the Village of Altamont Zoning Board of Appeals this evening, January 11th, 2022 at 7 p.m. to conduct regular board meeting. The meeting will be held remotely as a part of the Village of Altamont's COVID-19 response plan and can be accessed by the public by using the following link posted in the the Village website, or in a dial in number if you so choose. Okay, this evening is to hear the applicant. Mr. Polk, regarding a special use permit for a chicken coop. I don't have to remind anybody about their exits, no emergencies. Okay, presiding with us this evening, I would like the Zoning Board of Appeals to introduce themselves. As I call you, Kate Provencher.
Hello there. Hi, I'm Kate Provencher. Welcome.
Laura.
Hi, I'm Laura Murphy.
Sal. We have with us this evening Sal Tassone and James.
Hello, good evening, everyone. I'm James Sullivan.
Okay. Having said so.
I think Sal's off mute now, Danny, so maybe you want
Sal,
to check your.
want to say hello to the public? Yeah, he's off mute, but we can't hear him. Okay.
Let's.
All right. At this point in time, I'm going to ask our applicant, Mr. Polk, to speak regarding his application.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for considering my application. My name is John Polk. My wife and I, Rebecca Stumpf, and I have our property at 101 Bosenkill in the village. I'm not sure what I should speak to or present at the moment. Would you like me to describe what it is we'd like to do, or talk a bit about the history of our property? Is this the right time for that?
Your application, what you would like to do.
Oh, sure. Okay. Very well. So we have our property at 101 Bosenkill. Our property is a little over 19 acres. Historically, this property has been a working farm, as we understand it, with both large and small animals. There is an existing chicken coop on the property, fenced area for other animals as well in other places. We are proposing in our request to the village to be able to, we're requesting permission to have up to 6 chickens. And we're set back the chickens are pretty much centrally located on the property, pretty far from any property boundaries. I don't think they'll be affecting any neighbors of any sort. That's essentially what we're looking to do.
Okay.
Happy to answer any questions.
All right. And thank you, our legal counsel to the village, Allison Phillips, just joined us. Good evening.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Allison.
Hello.
So if anybody has any questions on the board, that you want to ask Mr. Polk, or any concerns?
I questions, Mr. Polk. Thank you,
Yes.
Danny. Could you just say a little bit more about your understanding when you bought the property? It sounds like that you understood it to have been a farm there, and you said that there was an existing chicken coop. Had that been being used when you bought the property?
It's uncertain, it's unclear to me when different parts of the property were used. We understood from speaking with to house animals. I don't believe it was particularly recently, but I don't know exactly when that took, when they had animals there. We understood from speaking with the one of, I guess, the daughter of the former owner, that there had been some horses that had been kept in the front field in recent times. But beyond that, I don't know the history of all of the different parts of the property.
Okay, thank you. And but there was an existing chicken coop
Correct.
that's in good working order.
Yes.
Okay, thanks. And how did you know to ask for permission to have chickens? I'm curious about that. Since
Well, we had done some looking around on the village website. We had looked at we encountered we found that in Guilderland it is possible for people to have chickens. Part of our property is in Guilderland, part of our property is in the village, and we found records, I guess, of a proposal that had come before the board, I guess, a couple of years ago, that was not passed. So we understood that it was not strictly permitted at the moment, but so we wanted to make sure everything was we're doing the right thing and seeking permission, so we're not encountering any problems down the line.
Oh, thank you for doing that. You know, and I didn't realize that part of your property is in Guilderland and part of it is in Altamont. Do you know where the line is on that?
Not exactly, no.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. And Danny, do we know if there've been any, I imagine that I don't see a list of the neighbors being notified. Were notifications made, and did we receive any feedback from neighbors?
Notifications were sent out. I mean, this was publicized. I know of no correspondence from neighbors.
Okay.
Unless somebody from the office. I was told of none this afternoon when this was an emergency to, because of COVID, to transform to Zoom. When Patty called me, there were no correspondence to date.
Okay, great, thank you.
Hey, Danny, this is Deb Hext.
Yes.
Notifications to neighbors don't need to be sent out unless it's a public hearing.
Okay,
So notifications didn't go out because this is just an initial meeting. It's not a public hearing.
gotcha. Thank you.
Sure.
Anyone else questions for Mr. Polk or concerns?
I'm sorry, I'm taken aback by that. Why wouldn't this be a public hearing? Not that I want to delay it any longer, but I'm not understanding why that is.
If I can speak to that, Danny, just under our law, typically, an application is filed through the clerk's office with the clerk of the planning board or the zoning board of appeals. And then it's up to the ZBA to review the application, determine if the application's complete, if it wants to ask for more information from the applicant, and then, take the next step to schedule a public hearing. At that point in time, if the board proceeds with that step, we would also authorize a referral to the county planning board and notification to the neighbors and publication in the paper. But that typically isn't done until the board has a chance to meet and review the application materials and determine if it's complete in its view.
Thank you. I know myself and Gary Goss, our code enforcement officer, visited Mr. Polk 2-3 weeks ago on the property. He showed us where the coop was located, the size, the dimensions, and I can pretty much say that from that point, just information for you guys to conjure, I could not see any of the neighbors. Okay. The house is set back considerably on the property. I do believe, and you even mentioned it's a 19, almost 20 acre property, very treed. Nonetheless, in doing a little research on chicken coops, I had informed him that if anything were to go or happen in a positive point, he would have to enlarge the run, not the coop itself, but the run, to give him more space to exercise. And he's aware of that. Anyone else with concerns or questions? Yes, Mr. Sullivan.
Danny, just to clarify, so the map or the drawing of the existing shed in the run, that reflects the proposed idea, but not the recommended expansion?
Yeah, the run itself, as you're looking at the map on the right side, would have to be extended to give them another 5 square feet, not even 5 square feet, come out another 5 feet, an extension from what it is.
The
And-
map reflects the existing.
Okay, thank you. And then one follow-up for Ms. Phillips. Would the proposed keeping of 6 chickens be within the scope of the town law?
So let me, I'm going to kind of answer that, but with a little background, if you guys will indulge me just for a moment. So the application before you tonight is for a use variance, and that is because,
Go out.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, that is because the village's zoning law does not currently permit, or its code, it's the village's local laws do not permit the keeping of fowl, within the village. So there's an actual prohibition in the law on this kind of use. So that is why the applicant has come to you, the ZBA, asking for a use variance. And under the New York State law and the village code, it's a very high standard for a use variance because you're essentially coming to the zoning board of appeals asking the board to allow a use that is otherwise prohibited under the village's local laws. And that means it's prohibited for everyone in the village. So the way the law is set up, the applicant has to show a unique hardship in order to meet the standard to get a use variance, to allow him to use his property in a manner that's prohibited under the village's local laws for all residents. And the way you establish that unnecessary hardship is through a 4-part test that's in your zoning law. And you have to, for a use variance, it's very different than an area variance, where with an area variance, you're kind of balancing the benefit the applicant is seeking to achieve versus the detriment to the community. And, your inability to satisfy any one factor of the area variance test doesn't kill the application. That is not the same for a use variance. For a use variance, to establish that unnecessary hardship, you've got to show you can meet each of the 4 factors in the test under your law. And those are at section 355, 52(2) of your zoning law. And just going through those factors, I'm just going to read from you what the law says. It says, no such use variance shall be granted by the ZBA without a showing by the applicant that applicable zoning regulations and restrictions have caused unreasonable hardship. In order to prove such unreasonable hardship, the applicant shall demonstrate to the ZBA that for each and every permitted use under the zoning regulations for the particular district where the property is located, number one, the applicant can't realize a reasonable return, providing that lack of return is substantial. Two, the alleged hardship relating to the property in question is unique and does not apply to a substantial portion of the district or neighborhood. Three, the requested use variance, if granted, will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. And four, the alleged hardship is not self-created. So if you can't satisfy any of those standards, you can't get a use variance. So in this case, just based on kind of what I've heard, you're supposed to show each of these for any use that's permitted in the zoning district. So, kind of a classic example, you've got a residential property and you want to use it for a commercial use. It's not permitted in the zoning district. You come to the ZBA. They'll look at it and say, well, could you get a reasonable return on your property if you just use it as a residential property? What's the unique hardship to you that, you have to use it for a commercial use? It's kind of similar in this case where, the applicant, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think, there's a residence on the parcel. You're using it as a residential use. It's capable of use, a use that is permitted in the zoning district under our local law. So the first factor, is difficult to establish in this case because based on what I've heard, the applicant can't realize a reasonable return, by using his property for a use that's permitted in the zoning district. Well, they're using it as a use that's permitted in the zoning district. They're using it as a residence. The
So
fact that
I'd like
Yeah.
to ask a question about that, Allison, because
Yep.
we've been on the zoning board through some cases that were about use variances, but they were really very clearly about somebody wanting to do a commercial use for their
Mhm.
property. And
Yep.
this is really about a person wanting to, to raise food or, be part of their gardening or whatever. I mean, what the applicant has not said more about that. So I guess I wonder, as I've been reading and rereading, that certainly I know the criteria. What cases are there that look at this from not the perspective of the applicant is trying to use this for commercial use, but for something personal?
I think it's, I don't have specific case law citations for you, but I think the concept is the same. It would be the same as if someone wanted to build an in-law apartment and that use was not permitted in the residential district that you were living in. This is a use that has specifically been prohibited by the village board through legislative act, the adoption of a local law. So
I'm sorry, which law is that? Because I thought it wasn't allowed because it's not actually listed in the uses. I don't know of a local law that prohibits it.
I think it's also in the village's animal control law.
Is it? I'd like to check that.
Yeah, let's take a peek.
I thought there was a specific prohibition on keeping a fowl.
I think it's 355, 124 or something.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It may be in the zoning law, not the
Yeah,
animal control. Let me see.
something 124.
I did recall reading it.
I don't recall seeing that. I recall going by the table of allowable uses where it says, if something is not specifically listed, then it's prohibited. So I would be interested in what part of our code it says that.
Yeah, if you look at attachment number 1 to the zoning law, the use schedule,
Yeah, yeah, I have looked at that.
it has agriculture, not including the keeping of fowl or farm animals. And so, by excluding that from the definition of agriculture, it's not prohibited in those areas where agriculture would otherwise be permitted. And then underneath that, agriculture, including the keeping of fowl and farm animals.
Yeah, I see that. So that's where, okay. Okay.
And I'll
But
tell you, I mean, that is something that is actually fairly common in villages where, early on, there was, kind of a determination made that you didn't want the keeping of livestock or live animals within the village limits because it was, kind of historical, that was the, kind of the center of commerce, where you have a dense residential development, and it kind of, it's not such an uncommon prohibition that I've come across in more rural communities where the villages or the hamlet centers of towns actually prohibit the keeping of livestock and live animals. I mean, just kind of a, kind of historic footnote there, but, so again, you have, the village board at some point in time has made a determination through legislation that we're not going to allow people, to keep these, kinds of animals, in the, specified districts. And so, coming to the ZBA asking for a use variance, you are asking for an exception to that or a departure from that, rule that everyone else in the village is subject to. And so that is why it's such a high standard under the law. And that's because, the real remedy in a case like this, if you can't demonstrate the unusual hardship, the remedy is to petition your local government to change the law. And it sounds like that's what someone initiated a couple years back, a local law to allow the keeping of I don't know if it was specific to chickens.
It was specific to chickens, and really what it was that the mayor convened a group to develop a law to allow the keeping of chickens, because several residents, as I recall, Carrie, several residents had expressed an interest in that. I think that part of what happened when that public hearing was held was that perhaps folks who had been interested were not aware it was on. That it was that a public hearing was being held. That happens, and so there wasn't sufficient support. And as I recall, the village board decided not to act on it. It wasn't denied; it was just not decided not to be acted on.
Sure. And so it's something that could certainly be revisited. I mean, if enough people in the community feel as though, this is something that's become more popular, people are looking at, backyard chicken coops as a way to,
Be sustainable.
be sustainable, have your own local food source. And, if you put certain regulations on it, that make sure that, maybe you have a lot size of a certain minimum size, or you have a sufficient space where you can have a coop with a large enough run, or you prohibit the use of roosters so you're not having, noise impacts on neighbors. I mean, there's a lot of backyard chicken coop laws that try and, strike the right balance between dense residential development and allowing these kinds of uses, but it's done through legislation. So in this case, I do think it's difficult just based on, the description by the applicant to conclude that they could meet this standard for a use variance, just because, again, the property is currently being used for a use that is permitted in this zoning district. I don't know that the applicant could demonstrate through dollar and cents proof that he can't realize a reasonable return on his investment if he isn't able to keep a chicken coop on the property. And the fourth factor of this test is also problematic in that, the hardship for a use variance, cannot be self-created. And under New York state law, if you have if the use is not permitted under the village's local laws, you're considered to be on constructive notice of what the law allows and what it doesn't allow, when you decide to purchase the property. And it sounds as though the applicant was aware that this use wasn't permitted under the village's local laws. He was aware at some point there had been a petition to change it.
Afterwards.
Afterwards, okay,
No, I
Afterwards,
think,
when we bought the
think-
property, it was not clear that this was not prohibited.
okay.
I think that if you buy a property that where you have been told that there have been animals and that there is a well-constructed chicken coop, that you're buying a property with the idea that in fact it is a permitted use. So I don't think that is a self-created hardship.
I have to state for the record that the case law does not agree with that, Kate. You know, you are considered to be on constructive notice of what the village's laws comply, and there's a lot of cases where people have bought property thinking they could use it for a certain use. You know, didn't get a determination from the code enforcement officer, didn't check it out before they purchased the property. And under New York state law, that is considered a self-created hardship. So, you know, again, and I don't mean to be, I could certainly sympathize. And, you know, the fact that it's sitting there and obviously at some point in time, it probably had been used for a chicken coop, and, you know, you have it sounds like a large piece of property. It's not visible by neighbors. You know, if the village was going to permit this use in residential areas, it sounds like this would be kind of the ideal kind of property where you would want to permit the use. But it just isn't permitted under the town's, or under the village's current law. And I do think, you know, again, just based on, you know, the description of the facts by the applicant, it would be difficult to meet at least those two prongs of the use variance test. But
May I ask a question? It's John Polk here,
Yes.
yeah. So you speak of having to justify a hardship and a dollars and cents hardship, and perhaps this is related to the question that the other council member was alluding to. Is there any pathway, or is there an interpretation that there are sufficient unique circumstances with our property that would allow us to have that discussion, you know, to allow us to proceed without having to demonstrate the hardship? Like I don't understand why having to demonstrate the hardship in this sense is a necessary criterion.
It's required under our village law at section 355-52, and also dictated by New York state law. Because it is such a significant thing to allow one person in the community to essentially be exempt from a law that prohibits the use for everyone else. You have to demonstrate this, you know, unusual hardship, or this unique hardship.
Instead of saying hardship, could we demonstrate unique circumstances in that, you know, the majority of properties in the village are, you know, less than an acre, and we have, you know, almost 20 acres of land, and, you know, we're very far separated from anyone else.
So just
And so, you know, from the unique context of what we're proposing here, unique context of this property, not everyone has that amount of space. Is it feasible to proceed under a unique set of circumstances that doesn't have to demonstrate a dollars and cents hardship?
So in the use variance test, factor number 2 actually speaks directly to that. It says the alleged hardship relating to the property in question is unique and does not apply to a substantial portion of the district or neighborhood. And then number 3 is the requested use variance, if granted, will not alter the essential character of the neighborhood. So arguably,
very easily.
Yeah, so arguably, you know, based on, you know, the circumstance of your property, I think arguably you may be able to satisfy factor 2 and 3 because, you know, it is in an isolated area. No one would see it. You can't say it's going to change the essential character of the neighborhood. And again, you know, going to the language of the statute, the unreasonable hardship, it's not my phraseology. It's in our law.
I understand.
Yeah,
you're reading and interpreting the what's written, but, you know, is there I guess my question is, you know, since that is largely reflective of commercial variances, is it, you know, can the board take the position that this is a set of sufficiently unique circumstances that they could decide to proceed?
It's absolutely up to the board what decision it's going to make on this application. I can only provide legal advice and counsel regarding what the standard is in your local law and how the case law says, these standards should be applied to the facts of a particular case. Just so everyone understands, I use the example as a use variance, kind of a classic example of someone wanting to make a commercial use in a residential zone. That is not the only context where you would have, a potential request for a use variance. I just kind of want to make that clear to everybody that I just use that as trying to make like a simple example. But anytime you're proposing a use of your property that's otherwise prohibited under the local law, you're asking for a use variance. And again, it's a very high standard under the law for a reason, because they should very rarely be granted. The relief in a situation, if you can't demonstrate unreasonable hardship by satisfying all four of the factors in your law, is for the community to petition their local government to make a change in the statute. So I just, as your legal counsel, I have to, communicate that to you, the applicable legal standard, but, obviously, the ZBA is the decision maker on all applications.
It sounds like, as you were describing the four tests, that you were treating them equally, but when I'm reading this description, it says, it will be noted that the overall statutory test for the issuance of use variances remains unnecessary hardship. And it would seem that we're creating the hardship of him not being able to use the property as a 20-acre plot of land would be intended to be used, given the existing structures that are on it.
The village board adopts the laws. It's not a ZBA decision whether or not, you think the use should be allowed. Your jurisdiction is to review applications for use variances under the standard set out in your law. It's a limited jurisdiction. You don't have the ability to, impose your wisdom on the village board. If a determination is made that a use is or isn't permitted in a particular district, there is a remedy where an applicant can apply for a variance, and you are required to review that application within the limited authority delegated to you under the statute. And that's applying the four-part test to determine if there's unreasonable hardship that would allow you to grant the use variance.
And so can I ask another question about, the nature of, I don't know, I'm still having trouble understanding the nature of the hardship test. I mean, does it have to be dollars and cents? Can I say my children would be greatly upset if we were not allowed to have chickens? I moved from a much more urban town where chickens were permitted. So they were quite accustomed and used to the idea that having chickens would be permitted in a far more densely populated area. Certainly, parts of Gilderland are far more densely populated than the section of Altamont where we live. What is the criteria of hardship that has to be realized?
Again, for that first factor, if you look at the language of section 355-52 in our village zoning law, it says, for each and every permitted use under the zoning regulations for a particular district where the property is located, number one, the applicant cannot realize a reasonable return, providing the lack of return is substantial, as demonstrated by competent and unbiased financial evidence. So that's where the requirement comes in, that you need to show that through dollar and cents proof. That you can't realize a reasonable return by using your property for a use that's permitted under the zoning law. And again, it's difficult in this case because you are using it as a residential property, you're living on it. I think it would be difficult to demonstrate through dollar and cents proof you couldn't realize a reasonable return if you weren't allowed to have a chicken coop on the property.
Yeah, so I just want to, I absolutely understand what you're saying, Allison. I think that the way this is written, I mean, the way the law is written, it makes it really difficult for this kind of use variance question. You know, one of the use variance requests, for instance, that came before the board was several years ago, was to allow a lot in the central business district to be developed as storage units or something like that. And it wasn't, right? It wasn't permitted. And so the applicant would have had to go through every use that was permitted to show that they could make money that way. And that's where that particular condition is difficult with this request, because the applicant's not asking to make money. Applicant's asking to keep chickens.
Well, he's,
So-
he's asking to keep chickens on his residential property, which is something that all residents in the village are prohibited from doing, the way
Yes.
the law is written.
Yep, I hear you.
Would it be reasonable to propose that we revisit the chapter 125 for the addition of quote unquote keeping of chickens?
You mean, revisit it with the village board?
That is correct.
Absolutely. I mean, I do think because the standard in the law is so high for a use variance, I mean, it's virtually impossible for anyone who has a residential property, is using a property, you know, for residential purposes, to obtain a use variance, you know, to allow them to have chickens on their property, just because of the way, you know, it is such a high standard. I do believe, you know, the viable remedy is to petition the local government for a change in the law, and to, you know, if they're agreeable, adopt standards to regulate the use and allow it under specified circumstances. But, you know, that is a village board decision.
Yeah, because as Kate mentioned before, that I'm looking at the law right now, that there wasn't a lot of participation or any, possibly because nobody knew about it, didn't read about it, or, you know, whatever the timing was. And it was just tabled or, you know, just set aside. So revisiting it, we can, you know, look at the law the way it's written right now, or the proposed law, make whatever modifications, and see if the village board, you know, would again put it out for public hearing and hear the public on that one more time. Get it on the.
Yeah. I think the difference that time, part of the difference, Danny, was that there wasn't an actual petition. I think that if there was a petition to change the law from citizen, I mean, there had been requests, right? But there wasn't anybody at that point that was owning it and promoting it. And since then, I have heard people say that they wish that they had known. And of course, it is up to citizens to keep track of when the meetings are, but that's difficult to do sometimes, as we all know.
It is, okay.
Can I make a quick,
I'm sorry.
can I make a quick comment, just so you all understand, just from the village board angle? Yes, we had the hearing. The committee worked very hard on putting together a draft of a local law, especially Deb Hext at that time. I mean, hours and many meetings. Kate was part of that committee as well. And I just want you to know, we were asked specifically by a resident at the time. They did address us to specifically do this, and had some support. You know, that's why we put all the work into it. They were personally notified and did not appear at the meeting. So it was not only advertised as usual, but they were called and emailed. And it was unfortunate because I felt, you know, they had a good shot at having this, but there was no support that evening. So we had to table it. There was no choice. So just, that's where we were at with that. So that's probably a great course of action, is to have a resident and some others petition the village board. So that's all I had to say.
Thank you, Carrie. I'm sorry that I didn't know that part about the specific individual being notified. But there are more people who are interested.
So any other input from Any of the board members, public?
I'm just struggling with not considering this because the use is not for a money-making purpose. So there would be no rate of return. There would be no return at all. You know what I mean? It's just a private citizen asking to use this property as any reasonable person would use it with a property that has a barn and 20 acres. I would never even think to ask permission to have chickens.
Yeah, that's what
That-
gets
so-
people in trouble.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm struggling with is that, the test does say, demonstrate the, be able to, realize a reasonable return, but there's no return. It's not a for-profit endeavor. In which case, wouldn't the other areas of the test become weighted more?
But as Allison Phillips mentioned, that if it's not, because we have a comprehensive plan and building codes intact, if it's not in there, doesn't mean that you can be allowed to do it. It would have to comply. That's where the special use comes into play.
And again, you're talking about unreasonable hardship. So, is it unreasonable that, this individual can't keep chickens on his residential property when no one in the village can keep chickens on their residential property? And, could he realize a reasonable return by using the property for any use permitted by the zoning district? In the case of unusual hardship, you're really looking at something where, someone owned a piece of property, had intended it for a particular use. The law was changed after they bought the property, rendering the property worthless. I mean, that's a kind of traditional scenario for a use variance. It's completely beyond the property owner's control. It was not self-created. It was something that was imposed on them. You really need, kind of something rising to that level to demonstrate an entitlement for a use variance. And, it's a high standard for a reason, because, the village board legislates through its zoning ability what uses should be permitted in what districts, and allowing an individual to vary from that comprehensive scheme for development is significant. And so it should be a high standard under the law. But again, the remedy is if a majority of the community, feels as though that law is out of date, or that the use should be permitted in residential districts with appropriate safeguards and standards, the remedy is to petition your local government to make that change.
Allison, this is Deb Haxton, and Mr. Polk, my name's Deb Hax, I'm the chair of the planning board. And in order to do that, Allison, it would be the applicant that would petition the village board to add a use to the schedule to allow chickens?
It could be the applicant, it could be anybody. Essentially, making a request to the town board for a local law to amend the zoning law to permit, the keeping of chickens, in a particular district or in the village, proposing a local law that includes standards for the use, I think would probably be more successful. A minimum lot size, a minimum size for the chicken coop, an adequate size run, as Danny had indicated they were looking at, maybe a prohibition on roosters so you don't have noise complaints. There's a lot that goes into regulating this kind of use, and you put thought into it to avoid neighbor disputes, complaints to the code enforcement officer that become a drain on the village. Which is why, you can't really, you got to put in, take a hard look at these actions. That is something that would also be subject to seeker, speaking of a hard look. So the village board would have to do a seeker review at that. But it sounds as though, some of the legwork's already been done. This committee, had been formed before. It sounds like a lot of effort went into coming up with that draft local law. So I assume it would be a good place to start if someone would be interested in revisiting this and asking the village board to consider it.
And that would be either a resident or the applicant. It wouldn't be either of the boards, the ZBA or the planning board.
Typically, yes.
Thank you.
But there's no
Although
reason why we can't make a
certainly
motion.
it now is on,
Sorry.
it could be in our minutes that we talked about. I mean, Danny suggested that maybe this is something that should be revisited by the board. Carrie, are those documents that were developed in 2019 still available on the website as a proposed law?
Don't think they're on the website, but we have it because we gave a copy to Gary, I believe. I could be wrong when I say that, or maybe it was Danny. I don't remember who we sent it to, but it exists in the office. So we have it.
So could folks request a copy? I mean, it sounds like if it, I know that Deb did a huge amount of work on that. I was part of the committee, but Deb did a lot of work, but it sounds like that would be kind of like having a cake mix ready to go.
Yeah,
Don't ask me to bake, Kate.
No, you already put the ingredients together, Deb. Somebody else just has to. But I mean, if it's already there, that would be really helpful for other people who are interested.
Zoning board and to the planning board as well, because I think Deb may have one, just to make sure the boards have them. I have a copy I'm looking at in front of me. I will scan it and email it to everyone. Okay, so that because I'm proposing that we do revisit this, ask the board, the village board to reconsider. But after looking over the document that exists or the one that they tabled to make sure it'll fit within our zoning laws and if it has to be modified accordingly. Okay.
And just for purposes of this application, the board did receive an application. If the applicant doesn't choose to withdraw the application, after tonight's meeting, my recommendation would be for the board to schedule a public hearing so that we satisfy the requirements of the statute and then come back following the close of the public hearing and make a decision on the application. If the decision is to disapprove, the board doesn't have to complete a seeker review because seeker is only required, prior to taking an action to approve or fund an application. So just as far as next steps, I think that it's a great idea to, if the board is interested in kind of pulling out those docs and considering making an appeal to or a petition or request to the village board to reconsider that local law to permit backyard chicken coops. But for purposes of this application, if the applicant doesn't choose to withdraw it following tonight's discussion, I do recommend that we, follow through with a public hearing with the expectation that the board could probably make a decision following the close of that hearing.
Okay. Mr. Polk, I would ask you, are you considering withdrawing this application?
I guess that still depends. I mean, I understand where legal counsel is describing all of this, but I think that there are a range of opinions on the board about how to weight different components of the regulations. And so if there's a possibility that it could still be approved, I'm interested in keeping it in. On the other hand, if you need a petitioner in order to petition that the law be changed, and then I'm so willing. I don't know the process for that, or if there are costs to me for making such a petition. I'm curious to find that out, but as I'm a relatively new resident in the village, there are things I need to learn. So I'm happy to learn about that process, but I don't know whether these things should proceed in parallel. I don't know whether it would be advantageous to have the public hearing on our specific case in order to promote the idea more thoroughly in the community, to give it more air. I don't know whether, you know, I guess it's up to the board what you decide to do. If you decide to proceed after this evening, then that would be a next step. But, you know, if I don't know whether to sort of have these things go on at the same time. These are decisions that to some extent you folks have to discuss and decide upon. But I'm certainly willing to help petition the board for such a change.
Okay,
Gary,
now,
does it, I'm sorry, Danny, can I just
No,
ask a question?
ahead,
So this
absolutely.
means that the applicant has not yet paid a fee to
I have.
appear, correct? You have paid a fee?
Mhm.
Okay, so that's already
Yeah, there's-
done.
dollar fee associated with the permit or the application for this.
Oh my gosh, that is terrible sound. I'm sorry,
Uh,
this is a public hearing. I should be more.
That's okay. As Allison Phillips alluded to that, because we're having this discussion, there's a statutory time, in which case we have to make a decision on the application.
Well, first we would have to schedule it for a public hearing.
Mhm.
And then there would be a time frame following the close of the public hearing for the board to make a decision on the application.
Okay,
And-
So, sorry, so the only thing we're considering tonight is whether to set a public hearing or not. Correct?
If the applicant does not choose to withdraw his application, then my recommendation would be to follow through with the next steps in our procedure, which would be if the board feels it has a complete application, to schedule a public hearing.
So then, Mike, Gary, thank you for the note that said that the applicant has already paid a $50 fee. So Allison, I really know that you have thoroughly gone through each of those criteria, and I know that there is not wiggle room on those. The question I would have is there any possibility at all that there's case law that addresses that first criteria of undue hardship in a different way than, is there any at all?
I can certainly review it and provide the board with just a summary of any recent case law on that number one criteria.
Because I think it will be very difficult otherwise if we don't find that.
Yes, I can do that.
that'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you, Kate. Anyone else input? Laura, Sal? Information, concerns?
Well, it sounds as though we're gonna have to, we know what the next step is, and that it's really a moot point for us to consider this when we know that there is going to be an entire village, a village board that's going to be deciding this more than us. Is that correct?
We still do have an obligation under our zoning law to process the application. If the applicant doesn't choose to withdraw it, we go through the steps and the procedure in our local law, and the ZBA will make a decision regardless, because it's going to be up to the village board whether it even wants to consider the zoning change. So, that's out of your hands. So my recommendation would be that, we just proceed, schedule the public hearing. In the meantime, I can put together a summary of New York State case law examining factor one, just to kind of show the board, how the courts interpret that provision, which could, help you as you consider if you decide to open and close the public hearing at the next meeting. We can discuss it and then the board can consider any next steps. Again, if, the applicant doesn't choose to withdraw the application.
And sorry, just so that I understand the process more completely. So there would be a public hearing, And then the zoning board would make its decision, and then that would be subject to the village board decision subsequently?
No, it's two separate procedures. So you have an application right now for a use variance pending before the ZBA.
Mhm.
In our zoning law, there's a procedure where, as part of the board's consideration of that application, it holds a public hearing, it publishes notices, it sends, the application to the county planning board. That will, if the application isn't withdrawn, we need to complete that process to a point where the board makes a decision on the application. Separate and apart from that, you are able to pursue, a request to the village board for a zoning amendment, the adoption of a local law to permit, the use that you're proposing. One is not dependent on the other.
Okay, I just didn't know if the zoning decision had to be subsequently approved by the board.
No. The ZBA is the final decision maker on the use variance application. The village board has complete discretion as to whether or not it will consider or ultimately approve the change in the law to allow the use.
Okay,
Allison, it's Deb. When you say that you're still free to pursue it with the village board, who do you mean by you? Is that the applicant or?
The applicant, any resident at any time can petition their local government for a zone change. We do have, requirements in the zoning law for, amendments to the zoning law, which this would be. And interestingly enough, it does say in the zoning law, authorization to initiate amendments. An amendment to the text of this chapter of the zoning map may be initiated by, number 1, resolution of intention by the village board. Number 2, resolution of intention by the planning board. And number 3, application by one or more property owners or their agents. There's no specific provision for initiation by the ZBA, for what that's worth.
How rude.
Yeah. I didn't come up with that.
And
Okay.
so with that, and so a question for Carrie, since those documents from June are not still available on the website, can a resident request them? I know Dan said that he would scan them, send them to us. But I'm also mindful if that occurs at the same time that we're doing, if there is a public hearing about this, then I would imagine there needs to be some separation between, the zoning board considering this and sharing materials about that. But other residents might like to have copies of that proposed law from 2019.
Yeah, I think it could be made, it was a public document, so I don't think there's any reason it couldn't be available. Again, it would have to be, obviously someone would have to petition to the board. I'm not just the board, I'm just one person.
Right.
But, and again, it would, that would be something to be reviewed again, because personally, I would have to go through, I haven't seen it in a few years, so we'd all do that. But yes, it's available, and, they could definitely foil that. Any resident could foil to have a copy. It was public at one time, so I see, no reason not to.
may I ask if you're scanning and sending it around? I believe you have my email address. Danny, if you wouldn't mind sending it to me as well, I'd be grateful.
I don't have a problem with that. I do not have your email. I'll get it in a minute. Okay.
Keep in mind too, it was a draft. So again, it was just a draft.
Yeah.
And I just want to, I want to just kind of make a point, make myself clear, because I don't want to give anyone, the wrong impression. A zoning amendment is always within the complete discretion of the village board. So it's up to the village board whether or not it even wants to consider the change. They aren't required to consider it. I just want to kind of make that clear, so everyone understands.
No problem. Thank you. Okay.
I just want to add that because Deb was the person that pulled that together, I'm sure that it's quite complete.
Gee, thank you, Kate. I actually
Yeah.
copied a lot of it from the Gilderland one, so
I
I
know.
can't take
yeah.
full credit for it. It was a group effort, we were all in on that, so.
Okay, if there is no additional feedback or concerns or input on this here, I will entertain a motion to close this. And then, oh, before closing, we have some minutes we have to approve. I'm sorry, Allison.
And maybe Danny, now would be the time if you want to schedule a public hearing on the application.
Oh. So I think we have ample time, looking at my calendar right now, that we can set it for February 8th, our next meeting. So I motion that we, or entertain a motion that we set February 8th for the public hearing on this application.
So move.
We have a second.
A second?
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Laura. Those in favor? James Sullivan?
Aye.
Okay.
Favor.
Kate?
In favor.
I'm just going across my screen here. Sal? Okay. Laura?
In favor.
Thank you very much. Right, so Mr. Polk, we will be notifying you, but our next meeting on February 8th will be a public hearing regarding this application. Okay.
I appreciate your time. Thank you
Not
all
a
for
problem.
considering this.
And what I would do if you like, tomorrow morning, just you can call up the office, speak to Patty Blackworth, and ask her if you want proper procedures to petition the village to put this proposed back on the for a hearing. Okay.
I'll do that.
Bit of
And
a-
Mr. Polk will also, I'll coordinate with Patty, who should have your email since she got in touch with you about the meeting tonight to see if she can provide you with a courtesy copy of that local law.
that'd be great.
Wonderful. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay. Other than that, I think we have some minutes to approve from our last gathering, which is pretty much a year ago. Did anybody have a chance to read the minutes and go over them? Any concerns, changes?
I was not at that meeting. So I would be abstaining from that vote.
Okay. In fact, let me just, caramba.
It
Bear
would
with
be
me.
you, Sal, and Laura, I think.
Yeah, I wasn't a member at the time or at that meeting.
I just want to. You ever hear of Murphy's Law? No offense, Laura. right, I don't have the exact date, so I can't read it into record.
September 28th,
2019,
2020. Are you I'm sorry, Danny, were you talking about the minutes?
yes.
Yeah, September 28th, 2020.
Well, let me ask, did everybody get a copy of that and look it over? Okay. Sal is shaking his head no. So there's three of us here. At that point in time, can we entertain a motion to accept the minutes of September 2020?
Do you, I don't think that I can vote on that because I wasn't there and James wasn't either. So Sal, you haven't seen a copy yet?
That's correct. At this point in time, then I'll just table it to the next
Yeah.
meeting, okay? Because we need a quorum on it. Is there any other business on the table? Nope. And at this point in time, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Anybody?
I'll make a motion to adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Okay, thank you, Laura. James Sullivan. Approved. Kate?
Yes.
Yes. Sal? Thumbs up, okay. Laura?
Yes.
And myself, motion to approve to adjourn. Yes. Thank you, everyone, for your time. And talk to you guys shortly and see you at the next meeting.
Stay warm.
Thank
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all again.
Thank you, Allison.
Thank you.